All right, let's kick things off here. So first off, thank you for joining us. I know your time is incredibly valuable and I don't take it lightly. So I'm going to do my best with Spencer here to really give you guys some really important information today. And so today's webinar is looking at really a case study. Historically, Spencer and I do kind of back and forth talking about a breach attorney, the role, why you would engage one, pre, post, etc. But we're going to set the stage. We're going to do some of that, but we're also going to dig into an actual case study, a real case study. Names have been changed, but we're going to actually dig into things that I think you probably deal with on a day in and day out basis, unfortunately. All right, so a few housekeeping things. It is being recorded. Thank you, Liz. For those of you, I'll jump also to the comms PDF, which is number 5. Let me talk about both of those things right now. So there's going to be possibly 2 communications. Liz and I are debating on this in a friendly way, right? Liz in the background. But right afterwards, Liz, they're going to get the comms PDF emailed to them. Fair?
Correct.
All right, awesome. And that's something Spencer put together. It's really well done. I recommend posting it around your organization, whether you're a corporation, whether you're an MSP, MSSP, and really something maybe even to discuss over lunch with your team about. It's got some really good information in the event there's an incident. And then Liz will record this and it'll be created into a YouTube, and then some way we'll get a notification out to folks that is available for them to consume. Okay, intros. Spencer, first, where's the cat? That's the first introduction I wanted to make.
So thank you, Andrew. So the cats, one of the 2 cats or both cats will make an appearance at some point, just fair warning.
All right, fair enough. Well, how about yourself, Spencer? Thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, CyberFox, for having me. My name is Spencer Pollock. I am a cybersecurity, data protection, and privacy attorney with McDonald Hopkins. It's my bread and butter, right? We do a lot of the front end work, but a pertinent note today is a lot of the breach work, incident work we do. My team has done about 12,000 privacy cybersecurity incidents. I've done about 700. I don't know, I've lost count, but a fair amount. I've worked with a lot of MSPs, both on the pre-breach side and unfortunately on the breach side too. So we have a lot of knowledge about how to help you navigate that, but also helping you navigate the customer aspects, your client aspects, the conversations you should be having beforehand, conversations you should be having during an incident, to try to avoid those pitfalls to get you in trouble.
And Spence, just so you know, and it's not I should have been a little more clear up front. We may have some folks on here that are just straight corporations as well.
Oh, wonderful. So yeah, then obviously I represent the representation. We represent any type of company, right? We don't do individuals, like individual identity theft. But if you're a company, we help you stay compliant. Company, MSP, school, government agency, it really, look, everybody unfortunately needs someone like me to help them stay compliant on the front end and then make sure they're doing the right things if there's an incident.
Perfect. Okay, so step 3, we'll get into the presentation, Q&A, and we talked about that PDF at the end. All right, so Spence, I like to start off with just some level setting. I don't want to assume that everybody knows what a breach attorney does, why they would bring one in, when they would bring one in. So let's just kind of go through, let's get some of the level setting out and some of the terminology you often hear, etc. So talk to us first. What's a breach attorney?
It's a really good question, just because my family asked me that as well. So basically a breach attorney, breach counsel, breach coach, we're the ones that are the first call. We usually look, it's the insurance company, or it's us, and the insurance company simultaneously. Why that's important is because the first thing we do is we call you, we find out what's going on, and then we'll bring in a DFIR, a digital forensic incident response firm, a cybersecurity firm, who's going to come in and help remediate and investigate. A big part of our role to start is we want to make sure everything is protected under attorney-client privilege. So the courts, just to give you a little nerd history, the courts say that an attorney who obtains or retains an expert on the client's behalf in the anticipation of litigation, everything that expert does, so the cybersecurity company, would be protected under attorney work product, very similar to attorney-client privilege. It basically means everything that company finds, says, puts on paper, talks about is protected. There's always caveats, but in general, the court does respect that because the attorney is leading that investigation. From there, we help you with communications. If necessary, we'll retain a public relations firm, but we're pretty good about helping communications and keeping things tight on that end. We liaison and report to federal agencies like the FBI, NSA, Secret Service, anybody, those who get involved early on. And then we'll help you too, if this is determined to be a breach, work through that large amount of data. We'll bring companies in. We basically quarterback the whole situation. We coordinate and quarterback, right? So then we bring in the necessary parties to get you to that compliance point. So we bring in data mining companies to help sort through and sift through all that data to find that sensitive information. From there, we'll bring in companies to help with the notification obligations, so written letters. Basically, we're there with you nuts to bolts, right? To make sure that you're staying compliant. We deal with all the regulators that are implicated. We deal with the class actions that come in, the regulatory investigations, everything under the sun. When you have a cyber incident, we're involved in.
I want to just stop for a second. When you hear all that, Spencer, it's like, if you're an MSP or if you're, an IT security person on this call dealing, reporting to the executive committee, you just want to kind of walk through a tabletop with them right now. And anyone that wouldn't implement, proper security controls and least privilege based on what you just said. But I know, unfortunately, that is not the case of how things work. But all right. So, a lot of people think, again, I would think, incorrectly so, until I've met you and we've talked over the years, Spencer. It's like, okay, well, I talked to someone like an Eric Tildes, who, and for those of you who don't know Eric works as an attorney on your MSAs, scopes of work, employment law, all those things, quote unquote, left a boom. And I would have thought, hey, that's when I talk to Eric, but I don't talk to Spencer unless something happens after the fact. Spencer, true or false? Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest mistakes companies make is not talking to someone like me before an incident. I think the big thing companies need to understand is that you want to form a relationship with someone like me beforehand, because you want to be able to know me and trust me. Because if you call me when an incident happens, I basically do a very deep dive and a very intimate dive into your company, your corporate structure, your revenue, trade secrets, IP, sensitive data, every one of your pain points. And it's really uncomfortable conversation, but it has to happen because I need to know what's going on. The other part is you want to kind of understand what I just went over. You want to understand the process. You want to know someone like me, but you want to know someone like a forensic firm too, who we bring in, because you want to have these relationships almost baked into your incident response plan. And we help you understand, based on our experience, what you're going to see during an incident. And then I think Andrew and I are going to talk about this in a little bit, but one of the biggest mitigating factors is an incident response plan and an incident response team. And a lot of people, the mentality's shifted somewhat, but before it was just pushed onto IT saying that's our incident response team. But what I really preach is it's enterprise-wide, it's company-wide, and it's internal and external. Because when an incident turns into a full-scale breach, you're not handling it internally. You're bringing in experts from external. And you want to make sure they're baked into all these plans and baked into your corporate structure, so we know you in and out, right? So it's almost like, I'll use the example of, you don't have weeks to prepare for a tornado. A tornado happens. But if you have everything set beforehand, then you are prepared, right? If you've got shutters up, or you've got a plan to get into a safe house, you've talked about this with your family, you know the steps you're going to take, you're in a better position than a tornado just touching down. You have to figure it out immediately. That's the same thing as, say, a ransomware attack, where all your systems are encrypted. Everything is chaos. So it's really important to talk to us beforehand, so we can help understand your infrastructure, understand where your pain points are, to help you get prepared for that incident.
Really an important part, if you think about it, of being cyber resilient, isn't it, Spencer?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's the holistic approach to this, right?
Mhm.
And there's a whole feud between, I think, lawyers and security professionals about this, unfortunately, where one tries to kind of own the whole situation rather than the team effort. But I look at that into the enterprise wide too, and looking at this holistically. With what you just said was great, cyber resilience. It's not just one portion. It's not just the technical safeguards or the security controls. It's also the administrative side. It's the policies, procedures, and protocols. And it's understanding how this all meshes together and you work as a team moving forward.
Yeah, good stuff. Do we want to talk briefly, real quick, about attorney-client privilege? And this has changed a little bit in some instances, some case law recently. We don't have to go into it right now, but I know this is, there's been some incidents where this has changed, Spencer. But maybe just touch on this briefly for everybody, if you would.
So I think when it comes to attorney-client privilege, it's really important because we operate under the worst case scenario. Worst case scenario is that you have a class action or a regulatory investigation, or God forbid your business goes under. Where the attorney-client privilege really comes in is protecting everything that's going on during that investigation and that incident, and incorporating that early. And basically when it first starts is very pertinent, because if you engage parties without me engaging them, the court is going to say that's a business function. And if it's a business function, it's not protected, right? So imagine you engage someone, you have a security firm to help you. They get the restoration, remediation's all done. 2 months later, you bring me in and I'm like, well, none of that's protected. And you're like, it's fine. 6 months down the road after notifications, you get sued. We can't protect everything that was done with that security firm. So all the email communications, all the phone conversations, all the forensic findings, all that's discoverable, meaning they get all that information and they use it against you. So the attorney-client privilege is going to cloak a lot of this and protect you from that kind of interrogation aspect.
Right.
Now, it's gotten watered down some, but it's still, to me, probably one of the most important things to do early on, because you have to imagine the worst case scenario, right? If you don't imagine the worst case scenario, you're going to miss things, especially the fog of war. So you operate under that assumption, you get everything cloaked under attorney work product, attorney-client privilege, and then you're protected moving forward.
Good stuff. Any high-level things what really should be established prior, in that relationship that we may not have talked about so far?
I think to start, right, if you have cyber insurance, there are cyber insurers go vet attorneys, and they vet forensic firms and data mining firms. But the key part is to know who's vetted to start and who's approved. Because when you have an incident and you call your insurance company and you say, well, I want to use Uncle John down the road, they're going to say, have fun. We're not paying for Uncle John down the road. Or you'll say, we want to use the local cybersecurity expert. They'll say, have fun. We're not paying for that. Right. So knowing and meeting people like me, because there are literally seven or eight firms that are on every single panel. There's probably 150 breach attorneys in this country, and I'm not kidding. Now, others say they can do it. I'm confident saying there's only about 150 of us. But it's meeting someone like me, going to your insurer and saying, all right, is McDonald Hopkins on the panel? Who else is on the panel? I always encourage people to talk to one or two of us to see who you like more, who you're more comfortable with. But it's also then, if you want to use an off-panel provider, getting that written into the policy. beforehand, because you need to know this, because the last thing you want is to be arguing with your insurance company beforehand. If you don't have insurance, get insurance. If you don't want to get insurance, engage me, engage someone like me, engage a forensic firm now and get them on a retainer. Because if you come to me and you don't have insurance, I'm going to want a retainer. So you want to understand the terms that I'm giving you. You understand my rates. You understand the forensic firm rates too, to make sure you're comfortable with that. If you have insurance, you don't have to give us a retainer because you have the insurance side. So
The other
I
thing
think
about
it's that.
cyber, the other thing about cyber I think is important, Spencer, is depending on the policy, some of them allow you to, engage beforehand in certain aspects of it and do some preliminary things with their team, which is really awesome.
Yeah, and you get discounted. One of the best things is you get preferred rates if you have insurance versus our standard rates. You also get discounts off of tabletops, off of policy review, revisions, drafting. Depends on the carrier.
Yeah.
But it's an easy conversation to have because once again, it's a consult. We don't
Right.
charge for consults.
Good. Okay, Bob, thank you for that question in Q&A. And I'm just going to ask if we can come to some questions in a little bit. If you could, I'm going to ask for some comments in chat, but I'll do my best for specific questions. If you could put those in Q&A versus chat. All right, so let's get into it a little bit. I'm going to have you read this. I'll read it to you, but if you could read it, because I know you can all read, but and if you're a corporation, just role play that maybe you're the legal administrator for the law firm versus the MSP for this law firm, right? So as an MSP or MSSP, you've been working with the Smith Nevins Bly law firm for several years. This law firm specializes in corporate litigation for white collar crimes. You've inherited their tech stack. That never happens, right? And technical debt with it, and have a number of recommend a number of upgrades, security controls, policies, and adherence to zero privilege, least privilege or trust architectures. In your last QBR, you mentioned concerns on a number of gaps in their security posture, getting to M365, vulnerability scanning, EDR, MDR, and have log collection for analysis. So let me jump back also just to so think about that setting. And then again, yes, some of this stuff is old, but just kind of read through the tech stack and notice that also, they have remote attorneys spread in different locations, and use the all too awesome VPN gateway to access their corporate systems, billing, files, etc. So I'll let you guys absorb that a little bit. And here is the poll. Liz, do you mind putting that poll up for us and just kind of think through the scenario? Again, does it have to be the exact tech stack? Of course not, but you get the genre, right? Of you've inherited a company, you got large technical debt, everything quote unquote is fine in their eyes because of course they don't have anything anybody wants, or we'll go through some of these objections. Everything's been fine so far. And we'll give this about, another 30 seconds or so for you guys to answer this. Let's just see, Q&A, what exposure, material. All right. So Keith, thanks for that question as well. All right, promise I'll come back to the questions. All right, so I will give it a one or five more seconds to wrap this poll up. Come on, everybody. I know there's a lot of you still that have not voted, but all right. So let's end the poll, Spence, here and just take a quick peek of the results. And so, yes, it looks like a lot of people have dealt with this. Pretty much, 8 out of 10 dealing with situations just like this one. Let me just close the poll, and then I'm going to have you guys in chat, if you would talk to us about, this. I'm going to ask to this question, Spencer, your advice to an MSP or a corporation, again, has retained you pre-boom. They're sitting down with you. Obviously, you're talking to them about their policies, their security controls, their company. But then the MSSP says, ooh, Spence, got this company a little concerned. What are you telling them? And then folks in chat, what are your thoughts on this? And I'll take a look at chat comments as well. What could go wrong? Love it, Mike. That is priceless.
I mean, the things that are standing out to me in terms of the tech side, right? And I never profess to be a tech expert. I always hire people who are very good with that. But by my baseline knowledge, the on-prem Microsoft server, that's a problem. The lack of a SIM, lack of EDR. And the things that I talk about, because a lot of MSPs have come to me with this kind of question. First thing I ask is, what's in your MSA, right? What do you have in your contract? What's your limits of liability? Beyond that, what are you pushing in for marketing materials though, too? Does your contract, maybe your SOW lays out what you're doing, but then you have other terms in there talking about, well, we do your SIM and we do your EDR, and we monitor your emails, whatever it is, and you're not doing it, right? Then the question really becomes, how is someone going to construe that contract? So unless you have really tight contractual terms, someone like me is going to look at your contract and be like, no, the client had a reasonable expectation that you were doing this because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Now, beyond, let's say you've got good limits of liability based on your contract. The other issue is reputational. Well, maybe you're able to limit them to 1 year of services being paid, but then they're going to just go talk. And then downstream, you're going to get hurt from that. And I think when you're looking at this, when you're talking to your clients, I think one thing we're going to discuss later is what's your pain threshold in terms of what kind of clients are you taking on, and how are you documenting what you're advising the client. So if you've sat there and had a conversation with them verbally about you need to do X, Y, and Z, but you haven't followed up with an email memorializing it, that client's not going to remember that conversation. Right? That client's having 1,000 conversations, and the conversation with you is probably 15 on their list, and I'm probably 16 on their list. So, but I guarantee you, after I make a recommendation, if they don't do it, I email them, just memorializing the conversation, saying, look, we talked about this. These were our recommendations. We recommended EDR. We recommended you go to Microsoft Office 365. We recommended a SIM. You don't want to do it. It's okay. We've given you that option, because then when something happens, you want to be able to point to that and say, whoa, because they're gonna instantly blame an MSP. A company, naturally, they're gonna look at you as a hero or they're good. So they're gonna blame you for this. So it's being able to point to that in a non-confrontational manner to say, we recommended it, you passed on it. And I really think one conversation I've had with MSPs, well, look, a conversation I have with companies is really simple. I'm like, show me what they're recommending. And they'll show me, and I'll go get one of my forensic cybersecurity experts, and I'll get their opinion too. I have rarely found it to be exorbitant or unreasonable. Maybe once or twice, where it was just going way overboard. But in general, the things they're recommending is everything that this law firm wasn't doing. And what I tell companies, I'm like, look, if you don't trust your MSP and you think they're just trying to drag you over the coals and get more money from you, you need a new MSP, because they're there for your best interest. So they're trying to help you, right? If you don't trust them, then we need to find you a new one. They're recommending actually reasonable things. And then flip side, when I talk to an MSP and they're like, this client won't do any of this. Well, then the question is, how much do you want them as a client? I've fired clients before when they were high paying clients, when they would not listen, because all I know, I know how this story goes. They're going to blame me at some point, no matter what I put in writing, no matter what I've said to them. And it just becomes too much of a risk for liability. But that's a pain threshold question of how much do you want this client and want the revenue from them? but it's really about documenting, having expectation setting conversation. I think that's one of the big things I've always talked with Andrew about, and any other MSP, and any time I've spoken. You need to communicate. You need to have the expectation setting conversations with your clients and document, but not in a lawyer documenting way, being like, sign this contract that you're refusing to do this. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's just more of, here's what we talked about, here's what you don't want to do. Let me know, we recommend it. Let me know when you change your mind, if you change your mind.
I love what you just said, and there's some great comments I'm going to come to here in chat, Spencer, because we get that a lot. An MSP is like, well, we want to put it in writing and have them sign. So from your perspective, and this is, I think, important for all the MSPs and MSPs out there to hear. I think it's really important you look again at your MSAs and SAs, because a lot of people have not revisited those. And I'm assuming, Spencer, you already said it, but it's somewhere you're going to go right away representing that company. But two, is it enough, right? In other words, if an MSP, let's just say, God forbid, there's an incident. Let's not even use the B word, but there's an incident, ransomware, whatever. You're going to say to that customer, well, has your MSP recommended things? Is that email good enough? If they've done a good job documenting, hey, we met on this day, we were concerned about this, this, and this during our QBR, we recommended this, this, this. Unfortunately, you didn't see the, reason for doing it. By and large, if the MSP is buttoned up and has their stuff together, is that going to hold up?
I mean, to me, it is. Other lawyers might disagree. Well, once again, I mean, it's all facts. It's all
Right,
facts.
right.
So
Right.
if you put something in an email saying, well, we recommended you do this and you didn't, but then in your SOW or MSA, it says you're doing it, says that like the MSP is responsible, then obviously that's not going to work. But if your MSA is tight, your contract is already tight, and then you have that conversation and then you document it in an email, very non-confrontational. I think it's going to be tough for one of your clients. Most people are not litigious, right? Most people don't want to spend the money. They don't want to sue people who they like. And being able to point to something like an email being like, Andrew, we talked about this. Like, I recommended this, and you said at that time you didn't have the capital to invest. And then at that point, they're going to be like, oh, you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Would it hold up in court? I think I'd have a really good argument on your side to win on, based on the MSA and based on that, because, as long as there's not some other email out there saying we're doing this for you.
Yeah. And by the way, I want to point out, Christy, I love what you said. I love what Mike Stern said. Like, this is a risk conversation, right? And I think that's we're going to talk about risk to revenue conversations coming up here momentarily, Spencer. But it's really interesting. I just want to tell a brief story of risk to revenue, Spence, and then let you chime in here. But again, thank you guys so much for being so active in chat. I love what you're saying. I agree with you, Mike Stern. Christy did nail it. It's really interesting. So I was on a call, running a community call, Spencer, and this is what happened. And this wasn't a regulated company. It was this MSP said, yeah, we focus on marketing and advertising firms. And it's really hard for them to quote unquote see the light, right? To enhance their security. Mm-hmm. Because I don't have regulation to kind of be a carrot or stick rather, or anything like that. But we're going to talk risk to revenue now. What he said was, in the past 2 weeks, I've gotten 2 large uplifts in security. It was in the neighborhood of 50 to 75 a seat uplift. All the security controls, all the things they've wanted to do for so long. I said, what happened? So but in both cases, the customer of the marketing agency was regulated, was going through an audit. Well, the auditor said, let's talk about your service providers. Let's talk about your service provider controls. And let me see your documentation of what they're doing in their security programs. And in both cases, it was risk to revenue. And we're going to be talking about different nuances of these conversations. But has anybody experienced something like that before, where all of a sudden your client was going to lose a huge contract who previously didn't have the budget for your recommendations, and out of nowhere, man, they found a lot of money real fast. But your thoughts on that and risk to revenue conversations, Spence?
Yeah, I mean, so the marketing firm is interesting, right? But how I always start with clients is explaining the average cost of a data breach. So the average cost of a data breach globally is about 4.2 million. In the US, it's like 8 or 9 million. But if you start breaking it down by sector, right, and talking to your clients and presenting objective numbers, so healthcare is always the highest. And if I showed you, like, because I've been using these statistics for years, and what's so funny to me is, like, when I was looking at these now, I need to go pull the 2018 statistics, because I'm almost positive it's like a 50% jump or 75, 80% jump from the cost of a data breach to now, because healthcare is up to $10 million for an average data breach. Financials at 6, pharmaceuticals 5, technology 5, professional services, which marketing falls under, 4.7. And so when a marketing firm might come back and say is, well, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, well, then you just walk them through it. You get hit with an encryption event and you don't have viable backups for all your customer base. How are you contacting your customers, right? How are you finishing your projects? How are you delivering on these, how are you providing the deliverables? What's the reputational harm if you go down? And what hackers love to do beyond the sensitive information, I have one right now. It's a PR nightmare, because they are harassing the client, the customers, the vendors, all the way down. So the risk to revenue to start is, how much is a data breach going to cost you, right? That's the first conversation. The second conversation is then breaking down, and I think, Andrew, do you have that slide?
I'm going to get there, but before we go there, Spence, let me just ask you. So this, by the way, this is, I know you guys are shocked, but this law firm was compromised. It was through the Exchange server. Again, I'm sure you're surprised, through a vulnerability. Obviously, it could have been through VPN, etc. They had a lot of Swiss cheese here. That's something. But Spence, can you just, before we go there, talk to us about you? I'm going to flip slides, but talk to us about you. You know, if someone was, you know, let's just say you were the managing partner of your law firm, what's kind of risk to revenue if you guys are down? What critical systems and processes matter to you?
I mean, being able to bill, right? For a law firm, if you take my billable abilities away and I can't enter my bills, God help me if it's at the end of the month and I'm pushing the bills out. But entering time is just such a headache. So that, one, entering billable time sucks. 2, access to the records to bill time to service clients, right? We have a duty to be able to provide basically constant advice that's needed. If I'm a trial lawyer, not having access to those documents, if I have to file motions and I don't have access to those motions, it becomes a huge problem in terms of an ethical problem, but also a financial problem, right? So as a law firm, you're always thinking, how am I going to service my clients? And if I get encrypted, I can't service my clients, right? Especially if I'm not either cloud-based or have these protections that we're talking about, or have viable backups that have been tested. So it's, when you're, look, if you're talking to a law firm, the first thing to say is, if you go down, how long can you last without servicing your clients, without doing one billable hour, right? How long is that going to keep you sustained? Contingency firm is a little different, but it's still the reputational aspect too. There's been a couple really large law firms that have gotten popped, that have been in the news, like Jones Day, right? I had nothing to do with Jones Day, not my client, not me whatsoever, but it was all over the news. Law firms have very sensitive information. So the other thing to talk to law firms about is, how are you going to handle this reputation, right? What are you going to be telling your clients about this? Because it's beyond the PII with law firms. Think about a family law firm that's got records of emails between their client and them about just nasty stuff, or about the kids education, just things that can cause huge problems. So,
Right.
but law firms, we are historically very difficult to deal with.
So I want you to talk about this, but Hamza, if I'm pronouncing it right, I really appreciate your question. And again, the chat has been stellar. I wish I could answer and chat about everything in there. And if we have time at the end, we will. But your question about nonprofits that are unlimited budgets, you really got to focus in on their mission. The other thing with nonprofits often is there's boards, and often in boards, not always, but often in boards, there are people that have higher net wealth. All right. So again, you need to look at what is the mission of that organization. A lot of times nonprofit, for example, is in the health and human services and or has a significant, if they're donors, significant amount of PII, right, Spence, when it comes to nonprofits. So thanks for putting that in there, the cost of the data breach. So it's a really appealing, how, again, what is for them, it's not about risk to revenue, but for them, it could be, okay, your mission is to provide these human services for these people and this geographic region. And what does it mean if you cannot do that for this period of time? How do they suffer, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So
it's a reputational.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Dealing with nonprofits, right? It's all about budget. And what I just flipped the question to them. I'm like, all right, you don't want to do this. What happens when it happens? Like, what are you going to be telling what are you going to tell your donors? Like, you get a lot of donors that are anonymous for whatever reason. They don't want people to know if they give $1 million or $5, whatever the number is. But what happens when it's no longer anonymous at that point? And then they're known and they get a call. How are you going to defend yourself? Right? What reasonable story are you presenting at that point about what you did before this happened? Nobody expects you to be foolproof as a nonprofit, but it's also size, scope, and complexity, right? So it's helping them figure out cost-effective means to protect themselves and present that reasonable case.
I love that, Hamza, about that point, Spencer. So Hamza, maybe it's like, hey, look, what Spencer just said is really applicable, but then what things could we do? Right? I get it. You can't do the entire roadmap, right? You can't eat the whole elephant, right? But what one thing could we do this quarter?
Yep.
Right? Maybe it's not even a tool. Maybe it's something that has to do with re-architecture or whatever it may be, but you're not, so anyway. All right. Spence, talk to us about this briefly, if you would.
So this is from the IBM and Poneman study. I put it into the chat. They basically do a pretty extensive survey about the cost factors the average cost of data breach and how it's impacted. This is usually my favorite slide because the negative values show what decreases the cost. Anything in the lighter blue shows the increase in cost. So when I talk to a client every time, right, because what Andrew said is right, I always piecemeal these things. I always piecemeal my advice about what to do, right? I present them all the options, but then I piecemeal it. The first thing I was talking about is the formation of the IR team and the tests. Formation of IR team, testing it, and having a plan. It's actually more the savings because they discuss it later in the study, but whatever, it's still a large savings and it's so cost effective. So for a nonprofit, right, having a conversation with them, I don't disagree with the MFA for what Barron said. I think that should be universally applied, but talking to them about that, right? Saying, let's get an incident response plan together, incorporating external, internal, legal, and technical to work together, and then doing a tabletop. I mean, that's not going to be too costly, but it really will help the nonprofit. Also, when you're looking at these numbers, right, don't go say to them, you need an artificial intelligence platform. They're going to have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, right? Don't say you need DevSecOps approach. They're going to have no idea what you're talking about. Talk to them about things that are going to be very understanding, that you can help them understand. MFA. You can help them understand what MFA is and why they need it. XDR technology. I'm still a fan of EDR technology. I think both are very good, obviously. I think XDR is more intense. I think it's easier to sell an EDR technology. Insurance protection. talking to them about the insurance aspects. And I know I saw somebody made a comment earlier about the premiums are skyrocketing. They are, but we've seen premiums get decreased for people that are able to show administrative and technical safeguards. So I have clients who have been able to present a story, right? I always go back to present a story. An underwriter's got 1,000 applications and they all look the same. It's the ones that, one, you've got a good cyber broker, and then two, you're writing a really good story showing everything that you've done. And MSP is so crucial in that. And that's another way to help convince your clients to get that. Some of the big cost increasers, compliance failures, even for the marketing company, they're still subject to state data breach notification laws, right? So what I explain to clients is now attorney generals are finding people more and more. Like, we've been dealing with consent decrees over and over, and they're taking a lot more interest than they used to.
Spence, back just one other thing too is I love, like, again, what things can we be doing, quote unquote, right of boom? The IR plan, which dramatically decreases the cost of that incident, right? A tabletop. But there are things, again, for nonprofits, and Shanna, I love what you said, like there are free tools that you guys can help them with, that you would get some consulting services for, that would help them own their security, which they need to. But like, let's just take CSAT from CIS that any organization can use for free. That's very easy to help them and implement and just take, bite-sized chunks and navigate. So anyway, great stuff.
Employee training too, right?
Right.
Like that saved like 250,000 for a breach. And
right.
That's so easy to implement now.
Yeah. Okay. So again, in chat, take a quick look at these common objections. Yes or no? Yes, you've heard these. No, you've never heard these. I'm assuming we're not going to get any no's. Yeah, Vince, good to see you, my friend. Yep, all of them.
We have the backups is one of the best ones to me.
Yeah, exactly. Good. All right. So I figured, so Spence, walk through, your perspective. If you were sitting, let's just say one of the MSPs, MSSPs pulls you in, you're sitting, face to face with their client, number 3. Yeah, of course. I always love number 3 too, because it's like, yeah, you don't have a bank account, right? That's always a nice one. All right. So how might you help? Let's just knock a few of these out. I know we were down to 15 minutes left, but this has been fantastic. Talk to us about backups, Spence, and something around this.
Yeah. So the first thing you should ask your client, or for all the corporations on here, you need to ask, okay, when you say we have a viable backup, when was the last time you tested this theory, right?
At scale.
At scale, right? Not, you need to be able to show that your backups are actually going to be operational, and how quickly are you going to be able to do this? Most people think it's a light switch, right? Of like, oh, we have backups. We'll be back up in an hour. We're fine. Depending on how large scale your environment is, how long is it going to take you to do that restore? So testing that theory. Second, when they're like, okay, we do have viable backups, we're fine. Great. How are you going to handle data exfiltration? There's a group, Character. Very much all they do is do smash and grabs. They don't encrypt. They just come in and take your data. So backups don't really matter at that point. Third part is, what about a business email compromise and wire fraud? Your backups have nothing to do with that, right? So a lot of people don't have MFA on. Amazingly, I've heard the excuse before saying, well, we have backups. We're not worried about a cyber incident, nor do we have MFA. Okay, well, what are you going to do when you get hit with a business email compromise and we have to deal with 100,000 emails? On top of that, you had a wire fraud incident where somebody sent out $1 million to the wrong account because somebody been in your system, figured out who your vendor was, and then spoofed an email and then convinced them to send them the fraudulent wire. So it's really getting past, that obstacle. To me, it's easier now because people think it's just about encryption, but it really isn't. It's about the restoration, it's about the data exfil, and it's about, you know, the wire fraud and BEC.
Is there any issue there or concern? You know, you mentioned about, you know, let's just say spear phishing. Let's just say someone gets all the, you know, obviously they turn on email forwarding right away. And yes, there are, you know, detection controls for that. But Spence, let's just say they, you know, you're doing business and you have GDPR concerns. Is that a problem now all of a sudden if all the emails are and data is you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you have a mailbox sync, look, if you have an access, depending on what state you're in or what kind of regulatory aspect we're talking about.
That's true, New York or California, right?
New York, California with CCPA. Well, New York, it's basically 7 or 8 states are access only. But if you're HIPAA, if you're GLVA, financial, insurance, that then trickles down to just access. If your email was compromised, doesn't really matter if it was synced. But it's not too hard to sync mailboxes. And I can't disprove how much was synced, meaning we have to care about everything in that mailbox.
Got it. Okay, good. Any of these others you want to tackle?
Yeah.
In the interest of time?
The cyber insurance, I think, is great. You should have cyber insurance, but it's not the end all be all. That's just basically your financial blanket and gets you to the right people. But in truth, you only have so much coverage. If you don't have $1 million in coverage, you don't have enough, and $1 million is usually not even enough. So
great story by Eric Woodard, and a lot of you guys have heard it. He's told it. Yeah, he was the unfortunate recipient of a vulnerability in the PSA RMM world. Spence, he and his clients were all encrypted. Backup provider completely failed him, and ironically, here's the irony of ironies. He got a new cyber policy. His old one by 2 days was still active.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah,
even with, I think it was, don't hold me to the number, but let's just use this role play. Even with like 4 million in coverage, he still, I think, was out another $1 million.
Yeah.
So you know, again, these numbers aren't not to throw out a bunch of FUD. Point is they're expensive, right?
Yeah. I mean, people would always say to me, well, these are like, it's the average. So we're talking about mega breaches. Sure. But I'm telling you, especially beyond paying a ransom, we're not paying a ransom. The cost of these things are exorbitant and the legal is usually the cheapest. Amazing.
Yeah, right.
I mean, nobody believes me about that. Forensics are going to
I
cost
know.
you.
It's very true.
Oh, it's ridiculous. I want to change my rates because every time I see the forensic bills. So the forensics are usually like 200,000, 150,000. Look, for a one email account, it's not that. But with the mass scale where you're really getting hit, then you got to look at how much data you have. That if you've got terabytes of data, that's going to cost you another hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then on top of that, then you go notify people. Okay, then you get a class action. Average settlement's about 500, 600,000. So like these numbers start adding up very quickly, and they don't also take into account reputational harm, where you're losing customers over this.
Yeah, really.
Because it's like, I think 7 or 10% of customer loss after a cyber incident.
Yeah. Any others? Like, do you love that it's
we don't have anything threat actors want. That's the low hanging fruit. You know, those are the ones I know that are going to get hit soon. Just because, I mean, nonprofits, like threat actors love nonprofits.
Well, look at schools. That would be like,
schools.
You know, like,
yeah, I mean, schools, nonprofits, hospitals, it's rampant because these are malicious criminals. They do not care, and they will leverage that information over you. So when I hear a nonprofit say, nonprofits are, they do this a lot. They'll say, we don't have PI or PHI. You have donor information, right? You probably have sensitive, you might not qualify under the law to notify. What I tell clients, legal, practical, they never get along. You might not have a legal obligation, but what are the practical side of this? And everybody has PII, personally identifying information. If you have one employee, you have PII. You just do.
So in the interest of time, Spence, I'm going to jump here and just run through these last few, because I'd love to get to the Q&A. And again, I just can't thank the audience enough, because you guys have been absolutely stellar with your attention and contribution. Your what you guys have been writing is so spot on. And ideally we can hit some of these as well. But Spence, again, we as MSPs and MSSPs, we're getting better, but we still love our tech. We love to talk about, the gaps in their security, but we really need to start looking differently when we have these conversations. For you, why, again, why is pain so important?
Yeah. So what you have to imagine, starting with, let's go to number two, because number two then goes to number one. The three most intimidating people to talk to on the planet, and no particular order: doctors, lawyers, and security tech people. That's because we
Security
speak
/ technical people, right? Technical, yep.
technical MSPs. We speak a very different language than most people, and we get frustrated when they don't understand what we're talking about.
It's their fault, right, Spence?
I'm sorry?
It's their fault. They don't.
It's always their fault. Always their fault when it comes to this.
Right.
So you need to approach these conversations as what I tell anybody is like, don't talk about security controls. Don't talk about security audits. Explain to them pain points, right? What is going to cause them the most pain if they don't have it? Rather than you need security controls, because all they're going to hear is just mumbo jumbo. I'm not doing this. Perceived pain, subjective. Yes, you do need to understand what they're actually
really good stuff, Mike. Yes.
Yeah, that's having the conversation to understand from their perspective to get that objective pain. Because I agree with you, pain is subjective, but understanding their corporate structure gets you there.
And to that point, Brian Blakely's fantastic about this. He's like, he'll do BIAs, business and business. Why can't I think, Spence? Help me with BIA.
Interruption
Impact analysis, business
impact analysis. Yeah.
Mike, I love what you said, because he'll be like, look, what's a lot? For some companies, he's like $1 million is a lot. For some, that's nothing. $60 million is a lot. So it really, I love what you said. It's subjective, it's relative, etc. So, but sorry, please go back, Spence.
No, and I think when you start framing it as pain points, people will start understanding. And then when you're right, and this is an onboarding conversation. This shouldn't be happening 6 months, 8 months down the road. Look, if it hasn't, it's okay, have it now. Yeah. But it's having that conversation and getting them to, because then when you need to understand them now, right? You got to have that empathy. You got to understand where they're coming from, but then helping them understand what's going to cause them the most pain if they don't have it. Yeah. You don't have MFA. That's a lot of pain really quickly and really easily. Yeah. And I'm not going to be too understanding if they don't have MFA.
So you have a question for them, and then I'll go to some questions in the last few minutes here. So this is your question for the MSPs to throw into chat, right?
Yeah. So the question that I always am interested in is what is your pain point in terms of a deal breaker with a client? At what point do you say, beyond them not paying you, is we're not going to work with you because you won't do X, Y, or Z? So where does that, do you all have a line that you've drawn saying we're not going to allow that?
Yeah, good stuff. Okay, so Robert earlier on asked Spence, and throw that into chat, folks, what you think is deal breakers for you. So Robert says, to what extent has client privilege been watered down?
So one thing plaintiffs had argued, there was a case 2 years ago, the Capital One case, where basically Mandiant was engaged by Capital One beforehand for services. Breach happened, external law firm then engaged Mandiant again. The court said, well, no, that's not going to be protected. That's not work product anymore. That's a business function. There was some other things that the other problem that they flagged in that was it was being shared across the board where people that didn't need to see it were seeing it. Conversations were happening outside the house where it shouldn't have been. And so plaintiff attorneys have been arguing a lot based on the necessity and that this isn't anticipation of litigation, that it's restoration. Now it hasn't really held up, but a lot of it's timing too. And so it's a lot less strong argument if you engage someone yourself versus when I engage them.
It's really interesting. We had Clark Harshbarger on the cyber call a few weeks back, and he brought this very thing up. Clark is the head director of incident response for CrowdStrike. And, really, it's put their IR teams on high notice of these types of things, Spence, doing things correctly. So Keith asks, and by the way, guys, can you hang a few extra minutes if you can? John, by the way, threw in some deal breakers for you there. Keith says, what is the exposure for material misrepresentation regarding cybersecurity? I see people using terms like DR. He put in network doctor, computer doctor, without having educational status and claims. Also, I see expert, industry expert, guru without verifiable education and certification.
Yeah, I think staying in your lane is going to be really big, right? It's just don't offer things unless you're actually doing them and that you know how to do them. Cyber is so sexy now.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to hang that shingle out. But I think you're just doing a disservice to your clients. If you're
and you've dismantled some folks too, right, Spence, when their marketing literature said, oh, we do network security,
Yes.
we this, and
it didn't work out. Yeah. When I've had a corporation and their MSP was saying they were doing all of it, it's just not going to go. The conversation doesn't go well.
yeah.
Because one, if you're doing both, you better make sure you're good at doing both. And a lot of times you're going to overextend yourselves. And I think it's always good to have a second company, an MSSP, who just focuses on that and they don't do the MSP side, and that kind of partnership aspect.
I love what Brian just put in there, by the way. I know I'm going off track here and my ADD's kicked in, but he's like, what's the minimal viable education for in an MSP for cyber? Brian, it's the problem, right? But certainly for forensic firms, there's certainly things like, that are going to, a cyber insurance company is going to want to see. That's one area where you can get yourself in a ton of trouble, right, Spence? But anybody can hang a shingle. And that's the unfortunate thing here. But certainly, Spence, correct me if I'm wrong, to Brian's question. When we jump in as quote unquote the forensic people, start restoring, that's where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble.
You're on the hook at that point.
Yeah.
Everything that goes on from then on, I'm going to be looking at you about why you didn't do something.
Yeah.
And that's not something you want to take on, not in these kind of hyper situations.
Yeah.
Because then I usually will bring in somebody else and they're going to just start questioning what you did.
Yeah. Good.
One of Isaac said, one of smaller law firm clients object to cyber insurance because they think cyber insurance company will drag their feet like regular insurance companies. So they state they can handle communications, contact FBI faster. I just would tell them, may the odds ever be in your favor.
Got it. And
then, truthfully, that was tongue in cheek, but no, cyber insurance companies actually go really fast. There's hotlines. So we're on the hotlines with a lot, right? You can get my incident response from my firm where you buzz us and we get back to you. I mean, we're 24/7. So we're responding to people very, very quickly. Now, them paying you back. Insurance companies, I'm not on that end, right? I don't represent the insurance company. But from what I know, as long as there's not a coverage issue, they do reimburse you fairly quickly. But I think in terms of the initial response, you can guarantee them that, no matter me, no matter if it's another law firm, we're all very fast.
So we're losing some people. Let's just wrap this up with this, because Ray has a good one. And this, by the way, Ray, I think is really important that in your statements of work and with your clients, really important to say when something is part of your MSP, inclusive versus when you demark this could be a potential incident. So I know that's not exactly what you asked, but for MSPs on, really important to say, hey, this is now outside of typical IT incidents, right? IT that what's included in, hey, remediation work. We think this is broke. We need to fix it. Really important to establish that. But Spence, you want to talk about Ray's, because he brings up a good one, like how long is good, right? When we think there's a threat and we're trying to remediate and
it's look, that's a tough conversation. And Andrew and I were talking about it, I think on Sunday, about how far should somebody go with this, right? If you're asking me from my legal perspective, I don't want you to do anything, but that's not practical. It's just not. I think it's a conversation to have with some of these cybersecurity companies that are in the DFI world, IR world, to get their perspective. Because there is certain things like, and I try not to come out of my league, right? Of advising you like to pull the plug, to turn off the computers, because I don't know what's going to happen with the encryption event at that point. But I think this is why having a good incident response plan and knowing how fast you can implement it is going to make life a lot easier rather than kind of just shooting from the hip.
Yeah. And again, like I said, I know I said it earlier, and I'm going to beat this dead, Spencer, but really important having that, like, so your clients know there could be a point in time when there's going to be a third party brought in for verification, and they're going to get a bill, and that you're saying we're pretty sure this is outside of our swim lane, and we want to verify or not there is a potential threat here. If those conversations happen up front, you're much better off in terms of that's part of your MSA or wherever you deem that you put those types of terms. I'm not a lawyer. Spence, I put your LinkedIn in there for people to reach you. You did a stellar job as always, and the audience, you killed it today. It was phenomenal.
This is a great audience.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Liz, really appreciate you hosting us. I thought it was a lot of fun. And any closing thoughts from you, Liz, and what's next in terms of communication post-event?
Yep. So all the attendees will be receiving that PDF document about the do's and don'ts of communication shortly after this ends. And then the recording will be on YouTube, most likely sometime tomorrow. And we can send an email out for a link to that when it's ready.
Perfect. And I'll repost it as well. I thought this was fantastic, Liz, and thanks again for doing it. Spence, as always, you're awesome. Everybody, thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys joining in and making this so lively. So until we see it all again, take care, everyone.
Thank you.